The story of Iran and Israel is a tale of dramatic transformation, an alliance forged in shadows, later shattered by revolution and ideology. Once secret partners in a hostile Middle East, today they stand on opposite sides of almost every regional conflict. During the Shah's reign, Iran and Israel built a covert friendship, united by shared fears and strategic ambitions. Surrounded by Arab adversaries, both nations sought survival in each other. Israel, isolated in the Arab world, pursued Tehran through its periphery doctrine, a policy of building alliances with non-Arab neighbors. Iran, in turn, needed Western technology and Israeli expertise to modernize its agriculture, military, and intelligence services. Oil tankers silently sailed from Iranian ports to Israel's refineries. In exchange, weapons and advisors moved covertly in the opposite direction. Mossad and Savak, their intelligence agencies, worked hand in hand to counter Soviet influence and Arab nationalism. Yet this alliance was hidden from their own citizens, a pragmatic but fragile axis that existed in the shadows. Then came 1979, the Islamic Revolution. The Shah fled, Ayatollah Khomeini rose to power and declared Israel the Little Satan. Diplomatic ties were severed, and Iran's embassy in Tel Aviv was handed to the Palestinians in a symbolic act of defiance. The once covert friends became open enemies, and ideology replaced pragmatism. In the decades that followed, Iran and Israel waged a shadow war across the Middle East. Iran backed groups like Hezbollah and Hamas to strike at Israel indirectly. Israel, alarmed by Iran's nuclear ambitions, responded with cyber attacks, assassinations of scientists, and relentless lobbying for sanctions. From Lebanon to Syria, Iraq to Gaza, their rivalry spilled over into endless proxy conflicts. The 2010s saw a new twist. Israel began forming quiet partnerships with Arab Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, united by a shared fear of Iran's rising power. These secret dialogues culminated in the Abraham Accords, opening formal diplomatic ties between Israel and several Arab nations. Tehran saw this as a dangerous coalition aimed at containing its influence and responded by strengthening ties with Russia and militant networks. Today, Iran and Israel remain locked in a dangerous cycle of provocation and retaliation. Oil pipelines, revolutions, cyber warfare, and proxy militias have all played their part in transforming their relationship. What began as a pragmatic friendship turned into one of the Middle East's fiercest rivalries, a struggle that now has global consequences. Can this cycle ever be broken? Or are these two nations destined to remain eternal enemies in a region already on the brink? In the turbulent Middle East, Israel and Iran became partners no one could ever imagine. After Israel's creation in 1948, Arab states vowed its destruction through war and isolation campaigns. David Ben-Gurion crafted the periphery doctrine, seeking non-Arab allies to counter hostile Arab coalitions. Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi seemed ideal, Persian and distant from Arab nationalist sentiments. The Shah viewed Israel as a technological marvel and military genius in an unfriendly neighborhood. Secret meetings in European capitals laid the foundations for covert trade, intelligence, and military cooperation. Oil tankers sailed from Iranian ports at night, their destinations hidden from international shipping records. In return, Israeli engineers modernized Iranian agriculture, water systems, and even trained Savak intelligence officers. A Mossad-Savak pact was born, exchanging sensitive information about Soviet and Arab activities constantly. Few knew Israel even helped Iran establish the elite Imperial Guard's counter-terrorism and surveillance units secretly. The Shah admired Israel's resilience and invited Mossad to train pilots for Iran's air force covertly. They built the Eilat-Ashkelon oil pipeline together, bypassing Suez Canal and Arab-controlled sea lanes completely. In Tel Aviv, code words like the carpet business referred to Iranian oil shipments and arms deals. For years, both nations cultivated a pragmatic friendship, masked in secrecy from their own populations intentionally. This discreet alliance shaped the balance of power in a region simmering with revolutionary fervor and plots. In 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran, carried by revolutionary fervor and widespread anti-Shah protests. His speeches, recorded on cassette tapes, secretly traveled from Paris to Tehran in suitcases by loyal clerics. Mossad agents intercepted some tapes, warning Tel Aviv, "This man plans to torch our entire alliance." The Shah's Savak intelligence network, trained partly by Israelis, tried but failed to stop Khomeini's growing influence. In Paris, Israeli diplomats reportedly considered offering Khomeini asylum to neutralize the revolution's momentum against the monarchy. The Shah dismissed the idea, saying, "Iranian soil cannot host the poison of this radical mullah." Street protests in Tehran turned violent. Chants of death to Israel joined calls for the Shah's downfall. Secret American cables suggested Israeli officials proposed an evacuation plan for Jewish communities across Iran before chaos erupted. In one clandestine mission, Mossad exfiltrated scientists working on Project Flower, disguised as European oil consultants. The Shah's palace became a fortress, but even his most trusted guards began whispering Khomeini's name fearfully. Israeli advisors packed their bags, burning sensitive documents to prevent revolutionary forces from seizing intelligence secrets. In those final days, a Savak colonel called Mossad headquarters, "Your men must leave within 24 hours." When Khomeini's plane landed in Tehran, Israel's covert operations in Iran effectively ended in an instant. The revolution marked not just the fall of a monarchy, but the collapse of decades-long secret partnerships. From Paris' exile to Tehran's throne, Khomeini now declared Iran's path incompatible with Israel's very existence. One of Khomeini's first acts as supreme leader was cutting all diplomatic relations with Israel permanently. Iranian crowds stormed the Israeli embassy, replacing its flag with the black, green, and white Palestinian colors. Inside the embassy, revolutionary guards discovered leftover Mossad encryption devices but failed to understand their true purpose. Khomeini proclaimed Israel the Little Satan, aligning Tehran's ideology with a broader anti-imperialist and anti-Zionist axis globally. Israeli intelligence feared Iran would release details of covert operations, exposing secret arms deals and intelligence pacts. At midnight, Mossad agents in Tehran were driven to Mehrabad airport under armed Savak escort. An Israeli operative later recalled, "We left with only hand luggage and the clothes we wore." Iran's state radio broadcast fiery speeches calling for the liberation of Jerusalem and annihilation of the Zionist regime. Israeli leaders met in urgent sessions, scrambling to secure energy supplies without Iranian oil tankers. In Geneva, a secret Israeli delegation unsuccessfully tried to reach Iranian intermediaries for back-channel negotiations. A revolutionary court sentenced former Savak officers for collaborating with Israel in suppressing opposition movements ruthlessly. Khomeini's rhetoric inspired anti-Israel protests across Arab nations, elevating his stature as a pan-Islamic revolutionary icon. Tel Aviv's diplomatic cables warned, the era of pragmatism in Tehran has ended completely. Iranian television aired footage of burning Israeli flags, cementing the new regime's ideological hostility toward Zionism. Within weeks, a wall of fire and mistrust replaced decades of pragmatic, though secretive, cooperation instantly. The Islamic Republic handed over Israel's former embassy building to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, ceremoniously. Yasser Arafat personally visited Tehran, receiving a hero's welcome and Khomeini's full endorsement for armed resistance. Inside the embassy, revolutionaries found confidential Israeli-Iranian oil contracts, which they waved on television as trophies. Israeli analysts feared those documents could expose covert trade routes and secret partners in other Gulf states. During Arafat's visit, Mossad learned of Iranian plans to supply Palestinian militants with weapons via Syrian ports. A secret Israeli Navy operation intercepted one such shipment near Cyprus, diverting crates filled with Iranian rifles quietly. At the Tehran embassy, PLO flags fluttered as portraits of the Shah and Ben Gurion were smashed. Revolutionaries renamed the street outside the former embassy Palestine Avenue, erasing every trace of Israel's prior presence. In a bizarre twist, some Iranian Jews were coerced into working at the new Palestine embassy briefly. Khomeini's alliance with Arafat elevated Iran as a key player in anti-Israel resistance movements across the region. Meanwhile, Israeli intelligence operatives left behind secret caches of documents buried in gardens near their abandoned residences. One cache, discovered in 1983, contained blueprints for the Ashkelon oil terminal pipeline connected to Iran. Iranian television aired interviews with ex-SOC officers confessing to collaboration with Zionist agents under duress. For Israel, Tehran's recognition of the PLO marked a diplomatic disaster of historic proportions overnight. This decisive break reshaped the Middle East's balance of power, setting Iran and Israel on a collision course. The Iran-Iraq War erupted in 1980, dragging both nations into a brutal 8-year conflict of destruction. Saddam Hussein's Iraq, supported by Arab neighbors in the West, sought to crush revolutionary Iran completely. Israel viewed Iraq as a far greater threat than Iran, despite Khomeini's anti-Zionist rhetoric publicly. Baghdad's nuclear ambitions and Scud missile programs alarmed Israeli defense planners in Tel Aviv deeply. Behind closed doors, Israeli officials concluded, better the Ayatollahs than Saddam's nuclear bombs on Tel Aviv. Operation Seashell began in 1981, covertly transferring Israeli weapons to Iran through European intermediaries and secret airlifts. Captured documents later revealed Israeli shipments included spare parts for F-4 Phantom jets and artillery shells. Israeli arms dealers, using fake European companies, funneled weapons via Cyprus to avoid American detection initially. The Mossad coordinated shipments through offshore accounts, often meeting Iranian intermediaries in Geneva luxury hotels quietly. Ayatollah Khomeini's military, desperate for equipment, allowed these transactions despite their ideological hatred of Israel diplomatically. An Israeli pilot even trained Iranian helicopter crews under a false Panamanian identity in a secret deal. Tel Aviv justified these actions with a cold doctrine: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The operation became Israel's silent insurance policy against Saddam Hussein's nuclear and chemical weapons programs. Yet, Israel's public image remained unchanged as an enemy of the Islamic Republic ideologically and officially. This shadow partnership would later spiral in one of history's most controversial covert operations, the Iran-Contra affair. In 1985, the United States entered the covert network, supplying weapons to Iran despite public hostilities. The Reagan administration sought Iranian help in freeing American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel became the middleman, transferring American TOW anti-tank missiles and Hawk anti-aircraft systems to Tehran secretly. The deal's profits were funneled to Nicaraguan Contras, fighting a guerrilla war against the Sandinista government violently. At Zurich's Hotel Dolder, Israeli and American intelligence officers met Iranian representatives under false passports and aliases. An Iranian arms broker, Manucher Ghorbanifar, acted as an intermediary, promising hostage releases in exchange for weapons. Israeli cargo planes flew at night, landing in Iran's airbases under radar silence to avoid Iraqi detection. American-made missiles helped Iran halt Iraqi tank offensives during key battles along the southern front lines, effectively. In return, Hezbollah freed several Western hostages, though many others remained in captivity despite assurances. The plan unraveled when a Lebanese magazine exposed the operation, triggering outrage in Washington and Tel Aviv alike. Israel denied involvement initially, but later admitted facilitating shipments at Washington's request reluctantly. Ayatollah Khomeini reportedly approved the arms deal personally, calling it a necessary evil for Iran's survival. The affair embarrassed all parties involved, revealing the hypocrisy of public posturing versus clandestine realpolitik strategies. For Israel, the scandal reinforced its role as a master of covert diplomacy and high-stakes intelligence operations. Even as rhetoric raged, the secret flow of weapons proved pragmatism often triumphs over ideology in geopolitics. For Israel, aiding Iran wasn't friendship, but a calculated move against Saddam's rising regional power. Baghdad's Osirak nuclear reactor, destroyed by Israel in 1981's Operation Opera, symbolized the Iraqi threat vividly. Supporting Iran kept Saddam's military bogged down and unable to threaten Israeli borders directly. A secret Mossad report noted, "As long as Tehran and Baghdad bleed, Israel remains secure." Iranian generals met Israeli arms dealers in European safe houses, using unmarked bills and encrypted communications constantly. In one dramatic episode, Mossad agents smuggled F-4 Phantom jet parts into Iran, disguised as medical equipment. Israeli engineers modified American Hawk missiles to work with Iran's radar systems in underground workshops near Tehran. Captured Iranian soldiers carried Israeli-made Uzi submachine guns, shocking Iraqi intelligence operatives during battlefield interrogations significantly. The CIA monitored these transactions, but turned a blind eye, fearing Iraqi dominance if Iran collapsed rapidly. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's rise complicated matters. As Iran funneled Israeli weapons to its Lebanese proxy force indirectly, Tel Aviv's double game became a dangerous balancing act between pragmatism and empowering future enemies inadvertently. For Iran, the weapons kept them alive, even as propaganda portrayed Israel as an eternal adversary rhetorically. Historians now call this period a marriage of convenience in the blood-soaked deserts of the Middle East. The Iran-Iraq War eventually ended, but the secret deals left scars on all sides diplomatically and militarily. It was proof that in geopolitics, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only shifting interests. In the 1990s, Iran invested heavily in Hezbollah, transforming it into a regional military proxy force. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, Quds Force operatives trained Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley secretly and systematically. Shipments of Iranian weapons, including Katyusha rockets and explosives, arrived via Syria to Hezbollah-controlled areas discreetly. Israel discovered the Karine A ship in 2002, carrying 50 tons of Iranian arms for Palestinians. Mossad tracked Iranian diplomats who coordinated arms deals from Damascus under cover of cultural attaché positions publicly. Iran funneled millions to Hamas, empowering suicide bombings and intifada uprisings against Israeli civilian populations persistently. A Mossad report warned, Iranian proxies are encircling Israel. A new asymmetric war has begun. Hezbollah's 1994 bombing of a Jewish center in Buenos Aires killed 85 people, shocking Israeli intelligence deeply. Israel assassinated key Hezbollah operatives, including Abbas al-Musawi, in a helicopter missile strike in southern Lebanon. Iranian commanders responded by smuggling advanced anti-tank missiles into southern Lebanon, preparing for future war scenarios carefully. The 1996 Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia was also linked to IRGC-trained militants covertly. Israel increased surveillance operations in Lebanon, planting listening devices disguised as rocks near Hezbollah supply routes actively. A captured Hezbollah fighter revealed, "Every rocket we fire bears markings of Iranian factories and engineers." Iran's strategy aimed to bleed Israel through proxies, avoiding direct confrontation but inflicting constant psychological warfare deliberately. This marked the beginning of a shadow conflict stretching across continents and lasting decades without resolution. By the late 1990s, Iran's nuclear program shifted from energy production to potential weapons development secretly. Satellite images showed suspicious construction at Natanz in Iraq, alarming Israeli defense planners in Tel Aviv. Mossad agents infiltrated European companies supplying Iran with centrifuge parts, sabotaging shipments by contaminating them deliberately. Operation Suitor disrupted Iranian air defense radars, allowing Israeli reconnaissance planes to monitor nuclear facilities undetected. In 2003, an Iranian dissident group exposed secret uranium enrichment plants, confirming Israeli intelligence warnings globally. Israel's prime minister called Iran's nuclear program an existential threat to the Jewish state's very survival. Mossad assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists, including Ardashir Hosseinipour, in a covert poisoning operation disguised as a gas leak. Stuxnet, a joint Israeli-American cyber weapon, crippled Iran's centrifuges, setting back enrichment progress by nearly 2 critical years. Iran accused Israel of orchestrating mysterious explosions at missile factories and nuclear research labs across the country. An Iranian engineer, recruited by Mossad in Istanbul, smuggled blueprints of underground facilities on microfilm. Israeli commandos rehearsed airstrikes on Natanz in Nevada's desert, preparing for a possible preemptive military operation carefully. Iran retaliated by targeting Israeli tourists in Bulgaria and attacking diplomatic cars with magnetic bombs brazenly. A top Mossad officer warned, "This is not espionage, it's a silent war for survival." The nuclear standoff deepened, dragging global powers into the growing rift between Tehran and Jerusalem. Inevitably, for Israel, stopping Iran's nuclear ambitions became the nation's paramount foreign policy goal throughout the 2000s. As Iran expanded influence, Israel launched a global diplomatic campaign to isolate Tehran politically and economically aggressively. Israeli diplomats presented dossiers on Iranian nuclear activities to the United Nations and European Union persistently. Mossad leaked intelligence on Iranian arms transfers to terrorist groups, pressuring Western nations into tighter sanctions rapidly. At CIA headquarters, Mossad briefed American counterparts on Iran's progress toward weaponizing enriched uranium, secretly. Israel's ambassador to Washington coordinated with AIPAC to lobby Congress for crippling sanctions legislation against Tehran, relentlessly. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon warned European leaders, if diplomacy fails, Israel reserves the right to act alone. Behind the scenes, Mossad funded think tanks producing reports on Iranian human rights abuses to sway public opinion. In Dubai, Mossad agents monitored Iranian bankers laundering money through front companies to evade existing sanctions laws. Israeli cyber teams hacked into Iranian shipping databases, exposing illicit oil sales disguised as Malaysian cargo shipments. Iran responded with cyber attacks on Israeli banks, briefly paralyzing ATMs and financial systems in Tel Aviv. At international conferences, Israeli representatives held up photographs of Iranian missiles labeled "Death to Israel" in Farsi. This global campaign succeeded in aligning the US, EU, and Gulf states against Iran's regional ambitions. In Tehran, Ayatollahs accused Israel of orchestrating economic warfare designed to destabilize the Islamic Republic internally. Yet for Israel, the sanctions were merely a stopgap to delay Iran's nuclear program, not a final solution. As the decade ended, both nations prepared for deeper confrontation, knowing the covert war had only just begun. In the 1990s, Iran invested heavily in Hezbollah, transforming it into a regional military proxy force. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, Quds Force operatives trained Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley secretly and systematically. Shipments of Iranian weapons, including Katyusha rockets and explosives, arrived via Syria to Hezbollah-controlled areas discreetly. Israel discovered the Karine A ship in 2002, carrying 50 tons of Iranian arms for Palestinians. Mossad tracked Iranian diplomats who coordinated arms deals from Damascus under cover of cultural attaché positions publicly. Iran funneled millions to Hamas, empowering suicide bombings and intifada uprisings against Israeli civilian populations persistently. A Mossad report warned, Iranian proxies are encircling Israel. A new asymmetric war has begun. Hezbollah's 1994 bombing of a Jewish center in Buenos Aires killed 85 people, shocking Israeli intelligence deeply. Israel assassinated key Hezbollah operatives, including Abbas al-Musawi, in a helicopter missile strike in southern Lebanon. Iranian commanders responded by smuggling advanced anti-tank missiles into southern Lebanon, preparing for future war scenarios carefully. The 1996 Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia was also linked to IRGC-trained militants covertly. Israel increased surveillance operations in Lebanon, planting listening devices disguised as rocks near Hezbollah supply routes actively. A captured Hezbollah fighter revealed, "Every rocket we fire bears markings of Iranian factories and engineers." Iran's strategy aimed to bleed Israel through proxies, avoiding direct confrontation but inflicting constant psychological warfare deliberately. This marked the beginning of a shadow conflict stretching across continents and lasting decades without resolution. By the late 1990s, Iran's nuclear program shifted from energy production to potential weapons development secretly. Satellite images showed suspicious construction at Natanz in Iraq, alarming Israeli defense planners in Tel Aviv. Mossad agents infiltrated European companies supplying Iran with centrifuge parts, sabotaging shipments by contaminating them deliberately. Operation Suitor disrupted Iranian air defense radars, allowing Israeli reconnaissance planes to monitor nuclear facilities undetected. In 2003, an Iranian dissident group exposed secret uranium enrichment plants, confirming Israeli intelligence warnings globally. Israel's prime minister called Iran's nuclear program an existential threat to the Jewish state's very survival. Mossad assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists, including Ardashir Hossein-Pour, in a covert poisoning operation disguised as a gas leak. Stuxnet, a joint Israeli-American cyber weapon, crippled Iran's centrifuges, setting back enrichment progress by nearly 2 critical years. Iran accused Israel of orchestrating mysterious explosions at missile factories and nuclear research labs across the country. An Iranian engineer, recruited by Mossad in Istanbul, smuggled blueprints of underground facilities on microfilm. Israeli commandos rehearsed airstrikes on Natanz in Nevada's desert, preparing for a possible preemptive military operation carefully. Iran retaliated by targeting Israeli tourists in Bulgaria and attacking diplomatic cars with magnetic bombs brazenly. A top Mossad officer warned, "This is not espionage, it's a silent war for survival." The nuclear standoff deepened, dragging global powers into the growing rift between Tehran and Jerusalem, inevitably. For Israel, stopping Iran's nuclear ambitions became the nation's paramount foreign policy goal throughout the 2000s. As Iran expanded influence, Israel launched a global diplomatic campaign to isolate Tehran politically and economically aggressively. Israeli diplomats presented dossiers on Iranian nuclear activities to the United Nations and European Union persistently. Mossad leaked intelligence on Iranian arms transfers to terrorist groups, pressuring Western nations into tighter sanctions rapidly. At CIA headquarters, Mossad briefed American counterparts on Iran's progress toward weaponizing enriched uranium secretly. Israel's ambassador to Washington coordinated with AIPAC to lobby Congress for crippling sanctions legislation against Tehran relentlessly. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon warned European leaders, "If diplomacy fails, Israel reserves the right to act alone." Behind the scenes, Mossad funded think tanks producing reports on Iranian human rights abuses to sway public opinion. In Dubai, Mossad agents monitored Iranian bankers laundering money through front companies to evade existing sanctions laws. Israeli cyber teams hacked into Iranian shipping databases, exposing illicit oil sales disguised as Malaysian cargo shipments. Iran responded with cyber attacks on Israeli banks, briefly paralyzing ATMs and financial systems in Tel Aviv. At international conferences, Israeli representatives held up photographs of Iranian missiles labeled "Death to Israel" in Farsi. This global campaign succeeded in aligning the US, EU, and Gulf states against Iran's regional ambitions. In Tehran, Ayatollahs accused Israel of orchestrating economic warfare designed to destabilize the Islamic Republic internally. Yet for Israel, the sanctions were merely a stopgap to delay Iran's nuclear program, not a final solution. As the decade ended, both nations prepared for deeper confrontation, knowing the covert war had only just begun. In 2010, Iranian engineers noticed centrifuges at Natanz spinning out of control mysteriously and catastrophically. The cause was Stuxnet, a sophisticated cyber weapon jointly developed by Israel's Unit 8200 and the US NSA. It was the world's first known cyber attack to physically damage industrial infrastructure, crippling Iran's nuclear program significantly. The virus infected Siemens control systems, subtly altering centrifuge speeds while reporting normal readings to Iranian operators. Israeli programmers dubbed the operation Olympic Games, testing the malware on replica centrifuges inside the Negev desert. Mossad agents smuggled infected USB drives into Natanz via an Iranian contractor bribed in Kuala Lumpur hotel. Tehran realized too late, calling Stuxnet an act of war in the fifth dimension of conflict. Iran responded by launching cyber attacks on Israeli banks, water facilities, and even critical electricity grids domestically. Israeli cyber units under Kezaria retaliated, shutting down Iranian oil terminals and disrupting communications networks temporarily. This marked the dawn of a shadow war fought in cyberspace as much as on the ground. Unit 8200 intercepted Iranian military emails, exposing Revolutionary Guard plans for attacks on Western and Israeli targets globally. Iranian hackers targeted Israeli gas pipelines, almost triggering a catastrophic explosion in Haifa's industrial zone. Alarmingly, cyber experts warned, "This is just the beginning. The digital battlefield is wide open." For Israel, Stuxnet bought crucial time against Iran's nuclear ambitions without firing a single missile physically, but it also opened Pandora's box for cyber warfare that neither side could ever fully contain again. Assassinations and airstrikes. The silent war escalates. Between 2010 and 2012, 4 Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in Tehran in broad daylight brazenly. Magnetic bombs were attached to their cars by motorcyclists, detonating seconds later and killing targets instantly. Mossad reportedly recruited operatives from the anti-Iranian group MK to carry out these covert assassinations efficiently. Iranian media blamed Israel directly, vowing revenge against the Zionist regime and its terrorist network worldwide. In Damascus, Israeli jets bombed convoys carrying Iranian weapons to Hezbollah, destroying missiles destined for southern Lebanon. Operation House of Cards, in 2018 crippled Iranian military infrastructure inside Syria with over 50 precision airstrikes overnight. Mossad agents stole 55,000 pages of Iranian nuclear documents from a Tehran warehouse in a daring raid. The files, smuggled to Israel in trucks, revealed secret warhead designs and hidden enrichment facilities alarmingly. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu displayed the stolen files live on television, declaring, "Iran lied. Big time." In Lebanon, Hezbollah strengthened its arsenal with Iranian precision-guided rockets, capable of striking every corner of Israel easily. Israeli drones monitored Iranian Quds Force commanders meeting Hezbollah leaders in Beirut's Dahieh district covertly. In response, Iran began arming militias in Iraq and Yemen to threaten Israel indirectly through regional proxies deliberately. A senior Mossad officer remarked, "This is not peace or war, it's a chess game with no rules." Each side escalated, yet avoided direct confrontation, fearing a regional war would engulf the entire Middle East instantly. The shadow war claimed lives silently, far from headlines, but shaping the region's geopolitics profoundly for decades. The Syrian conflict and Iran's entrenchment. The outbreak of Syria's civil war in 2011 gave Iran a new foothold against Israel, geopolitically. Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Hezbollah deployed thousands of fighters to prop up Bashar al-Assad's collapsing regime. Strategically, Israeli intelligence watched nervously as Iranian forces established military bases and drone factories near the Golan Heights border. Alarmingly, in 2017, Israeli F-35 jets conducted Operation Outside the Box, striking Iranian weapons depots in Syria undetected. A Mossad mole inside Damascus provided coordinates for underground tunnels used to smuggle Iranian missiles discreetly. Iranian drones attempted to breach Israeli airspace, but were intercepted and destroyed by Iron Dome systems successfully. In retaliation, Israeli jets bombed the T-4 airbase in Homs, killing 7 Iranian military advisors directly. Tehran vowed revenge, launching rockets at Israeli positions in the occupied region defiantly. Israel responded with Operation Full Armor, targeting over 70 Iranian military sites across Syria in a single night. Satellite images later showed entire Iranian ammunition stockpiles reduced to smoking craters within hours of bombardment. In Beirut, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah declared, "Iran's presence in Syria is permanent and irreversible." Israeli special forces conducted cross-border raids, planting explosive charges on Iranian radar installations along Syria's western corridor. This intense shadow conflict made Syria the primary battleground for Israeli-Iranian confrontation throughout the 2010s. While neither side sought open war, the risk of escalation hovered over every operation dangerously and constantly. By decade's end, Israel and Iran had transformed the Middle East into a chessboard of endless covert hostilities. The 2020 Abraham Accords marked a historic shift, bringing Israel and Gulf Arab states together diplomatically. Iranian officials immediately labeled the agreements a Zionist American conspiracy to encircle and weaken the Islamic Republic. Mossad reportedly ran secret operations in Dubai, dismantling Iranian intelligence cells targeting Israeli tourists and businessmen. In 2021, Israeli defense officials met Emirati counterparts in Cyprus, exchanging classified intelligence on Iranian drone networks covertly. Iranian hackers launched cyber attacks against Israeli water systems after Mossad sabotaged a uranium enrichment facility in Natanz discreetly. A top Iranian scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, was assassinated near Tehran using an AI-controlled machine gun, allegedly by Mossad agents. Emirati ports became crucial nodes for intercepting Iranian oil shipments, attempting to bypass Western sanctions and export clandestinely. Iran attempted retaliatory attacks in Bahrain, using proxy militias to target Israeli diplomatic missions and commercial interests there. In a leaked Mossad report, operatives warned Iran is preparing asymmetrical responses to the Abraham Alliance regionally. For Israel, the accords created a strategic buffer against Iranian influence stretching from the Gulf to the Mediterranean. As Israel strengthened ties with Gulf states, Iran deepened its partnerships with Russia and China significantly. In 2021, Tehran signed a $400 billion strategic deal with Beijing, covering energy, infrastructure, and cyber cooperation. Mossad warned Washington that Chinese tech firms were helping Iran upgrade its surveillance systems and suppress domestic dissent. Russian military advisors trained Iranian drone operators, later deploying similar tactics during Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Israeli operatives in Georgia uncovered Iranian-Russian weapons shipments bypassing sanctions through covert logistics networks in the Caucasus region. Iran supplied Russia with Shahid-136 drones, some of which were reverse-engineered from captured Israeli UAV technology previously. A Mossad leak revealed Tehran's plans to establish joint naval bases with China in the Persian Gulf. Cyber warfare escalated as Iranian hackers breached Israeli oil companies, while Israel paralyzed Tehran's gas stations with malware attacks. Israel lobbied Washington to prevent Iranian access to Russian S-400 air defense systems that could shield nuclear sites effectively. By 2023, Iran's pivot eastward marked a new geopolitical alignment against Israel and its Western and Gulf allies. In 2023, Israel launched Operation Shield and Arrow after rocket fire erupted from Gaza into southern cities. Iranian Quds Force operatives reportedly funneled millions to Islamic Jihad factions in Gaza covertly through Syrian intermediaries. Mossad assassinated a Hamas financier in Malaysia, halting planned weapons transfers into Gaza's underground tunnel networks. Meanwhile, Israel intensified airstrikes in Syria, destroying Iranian weapons depots near Damascus and Aleppo with precision-guided munitions. Hezbollah strengthened its arsenal in southern Lebanon, stockpiling 150,000 Iranian-supplied rockets aimed at Israeli population centers. Israeli drones tracked Iranian advisors overseeing Hezbollah's drone programs near the Lebanese border, sparking fears of escalation. In April 2024, Israeli forces intercepted an Iranian ship carrying advanced missile components destined for Houthi rebels in Yemen. A Mossad report warned Iranian proxies are coordinating multi-front attacks to stretch Israel's defensive capabilities dangerously thin. The situation created a volatile standoff with a single miscalculation, risking a full-scale regional war overnight. For both Israel and Iran, these arenas became testing grounds for their next-generation weapons and covert capabilities alike. Iranian leaders praised Hamas for launching over 5,000 rockets into Israel during the May 2023 conflict escalation. Quds Force commanders in Beirut directed funding and logistical support for Hamas's rocket manufacturing inside Gaza. Israel responded with targeted strikes on Hamas leadership, killing senior commanders in precision air raids in Gaza City. In one covert operation, Mossad agents sabotaged a Hamas drone factory in Sudan before shipment reached Gaza's coastline. Iran's supreme leader declared, "We will arm every resistance fighter until Zionism is erased from this earth." Israeli cyber units retaliated by hacking Iranian banks, freezing accounts linked to funding Hamas's military operations. The tit-for-tat escalations extended into cyberspace, where Iranian hackers disabled Israeli hospital networks temporarily in retaliation. Hamas fighters unveiled Iranian-made Fighter 5 rockets with extended range, threatening Israel's central cities like Tel Aviv directly. Behind the scenes, Egypt mediated fragile ceasefires, but neither Israel nor Iran showed willingness to de-escalate meaningfully. The Gaza battleground became yet another proxy arena in Israel and Iran's increasingly global shadow war. In 2024, Israeli military planners began preparing for a potential direct confrontation with Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iranian drones penetrated Israeli airspace twice, triggering nationwide alarms and intercepts by Iron Dome and F-35 jets immediately. Mossad director warned, Iran is closing in on the nuclear threshold. Time for diplomacy has nearly expired. Tehran responded by announcing it had enriched uranium to 84%, sparking international panic about imminent weaponization. Back-channel talks emerged in Oman, where Israeli and Iranian envoys reportedly exchanged messages via European mediators cautiously. At the same time, Israeli special forces rehearsed strikes on Iran's Natanz and Fordo nuclear facilities in Nevada desert. Hezbollah threatened, any Israeli attack on Iran will unleash thousands of rockets on Haifa and Tel Aviv simultaneously. For Washington and European allies, preventing war became an urgent priority as the Middle East edged toward chaos. Yet, hardliners in Tehran and Jerusalem both insisted their enemies understood only strength, not compromise or concessions politically. the world watches nervously, asking whether Israel and Iran are destined for war or reluctant to cross that line. By early 2025, tensions between Israel and Iran had reached their most dangerous level in decades. Iranian drones launched from Syria repeatedly probed Israeli air defenses, testing their readiness in border regions cautiously. Israel accused Iran of enriching uranium beyond 80%, moving alarmingly close to weapons-grade nuclear material thresholds. Mossad operatives in Tehran uncovered secret plans to deploy Iranian hypersonic missiles capable of reaching Tel Aviv swiftly. In May 25, an Israeli airstrike destroyed an Iranian weapons convoy in Damascus, killing 2 Quds Force commanders. Iran vowed revenge, with Supreme Leader Khamenei declaring, "Zionists will pay for every drop of Muslim blood spilled." Israeli intelligence reported unusual Iranian troop movements near the Strait of Hormuz, threatening vital oil shipping lanes globally. The U.S. warned Israel not to escalate further, fearing a broader Middle Eastern conflict involving Gulf states directly. On the night of June 13th, Israel launched the strike it had long contemplated executing either unilaterally or, in an ideal scenario, jointly with the United States, targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. Although the operation, codenamed Rising Lion, ostensibly aimed to neutralize Iran's nuclear program, Israel also struck Iran's senior command echelon, nuclear scientists, energy and civil infrastructure, as well as key components of its defense doctrine, including ballistic missile production plants, storage facilities, and launch pads. While the apparent objective of the operation was to dismantle Iran's nuclear program, the choice of the operation's codename, an allusion to the lion emblem on Iran's pre-revolutionary flag, along with Prime Minister Netanyahu's calls for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the regime, and statements from Reza Pahlavi, the son of the deposed Shah, expressing his readiness to assume leadership, indicated that Israel sought to ignite a process that could trigger regime change in Iran. Netanyahu's decision to attack Iran appeared motivated by his desire to maintain his grip on power and to create, through a war that would draw in the Trump administration, a new Middle East order. The strike came at a time when Iran was engaged in indirect yet serious negotiations with the Trump administration since April 2025 over resolving the nuclear issue. It was well known that Israel had been pressuring the United States to participate in the strike, and that the Trump administration, unlike its Obama and Biden predecessors, which had repeatedly dissuaded Tel Aviv from such a move, might give the green light. Yet the attack's timing, coinciding with ongoing nuclear negotiations, made it particularly deceptive from Iran's perspective. As Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi remarked in Istanbul, Tehran felt it had been deceived under the guise of diplomacy. From Iran's vantage point, this was ultimately an imposed war, sanctioned by Washington. Indeed, on the night of June 22, the United States directly joined the conflict, targeting Iran's Fordo nuclear facility, buried deep within a mountain near Qom, using B-2 bombers, an asset exclusive to the American arsenal. Simultaneously, the Natanz and Isfahan facilities, already struck earlier by Israel, were hit again with Tomahawk missiles launched from an American submarine. In the immediate aftermath of Israel's assault, Iran quickly recovered from its initial disorientation, appointing new figures to its command hierarchy and launching ballistic missiles of varying ranges and payloads against Israel. The missiles, which managed to breach Israel's multi-layered air defense systems and cause significant damage in Tel Aviv and Haifa, demonstrated that Iran had prepared for such a conflict and was capable of responding with destructive and effective force, contrary to Israeli expectations. Israel's hopes for triggering regime change, at least during the 12-day war, failed to materialize. The bombs falling on Iranian soil instead galvanized the Iranian populace, who, driven by a sense of patriotism and the imperative to defend their homeland, united under one flag. Even dissenting voices within Iran, while refraining from endorsing the current leadership, declared that the day demanded unity, stressing that freedom for Iran would not arrive on the wings of Israeli bombs. At present, Iran's entrenched political system appears to believe that any concession or softening could precipitate its collapse. As a result, the regime risks locking itself into an authoritarian cycle that could further erode its bonds with society. This dynamic is likely to strain state-society relations in the medium to near term. In anticipation of this risk, the leadership may increasingly rely on nationalist rhetoric and calls for unity against external enemies. However, it remains uncertain to what extent such messaging will mollify an Iranian populace demanding development, security, and freedom. Moreover, it must be recognized that regime change in Iran would not automatically result in a secular and democratic government. The potential for a power vacuum and fragmentation raises the possibility that the armed forces could intervene and establish a military regime. Although tensions between Iran and Israel have momentarily subsided in the wake of the intense clashes in June, the fragile ceasefire, coupled with economic woes, the devastation wrought by the war, and the necessity of reconstruction, will continue to test both Iran's domestic politics and its foreign policy. Whether the Iranian leadership will opt for pragmatism in the interest of regime survival or cling to an inflexible ideological stance remains to be seen.